12 Marines stormed her wedding in full uniform, matching like soldiers heading to battle, to reveal a secret that left every guest speechless. As the Marines stood at attention, the room held its breath. Who were they? Is there a security threat? Why her wedding? And what truth were they about to unveil? This isn't just a love story. It's a powerful reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness can echo in the most extraordinary ways. The air inside Sarah's sandwich shop always smelled like warm bread, melted cheese, and determination. Tucked at the edge of a sleepy town, the shop had once been a dream, her late father's idea of freedom and community. Now it was all she had. Every morning before sunrise, Sarah tied back her hair, pulled on her apron, and began prepping ingredients by hand. Tomatoes were sliced thin, meats folded just right, sauces made from scratch. She took pride in the details, even when few noticed. With only a few regulars and occasional passers-by, the days stretched long and quiet, interrupted by the soft ding of the front bell when someone walked in. She worked not just for the shop, but for her son, Eli, a bright-eyed 10-year-old with an appetite for peanut butter sandwiches and comic books. He'd sit in the back booth after school, doing his homework, humming to himself while Sarah wiped down tables and tallied up whatever few dollars had come in that day. Bills piled up faster than tips. Rent notices became regular guests in her mailbox. Suppliers started asking for payment up front. But through it all, Sarah held onto one rule: no one leaves hungry. Most days, the few customers she had were truckers looking for a quiet bite or tired locals short on conversation. But at exactly 3 p.m., like clockwork, Tom arrived. He never used the doorbell. He just pushed open the glass door gently and gave a polite nod as he stepped in. Ragged boots, an old coat 2 sizes too big, and a gray beanie pulled down low. Tom looked like someone the world had stopped seeing. But Sarah always did. "Afternoon, Tom," she'd say with a soft smile. He'd nod again, sometimes offering the ghost of a smile in return. Then he'd sit quietly at the corner table, same spot every time, while Sarah disappeared into the kitchen. She never asked what he wanted. She already knew. A turkey sandwich with extra mustard, a side of pickles, and a steaming mug of black coffee. No cream, no sugar. He never asked how much. He never offered money, and she never expected it. When the plate landed in front of him, he'd meet her eyes and murmur, "Thank you, ma'am." Then he'd eat in silence, never rushing, never lingering once he was done. Tom never caused trouble. He didn't smell of alcohol or mutter to himself like others who passed through the alley behind the shop. He was quiet, heavy, like someone carrying a story too big for words. But polite, always polite. Some customers gave Sarah strange looks. One woman once whispered, loud enough for her to hear, "Why do you feed that man? Doesn't help your image." Sarah didn't answer. She didn't need to. The truth was, Tom had become part of her day, as much as flipping the sign to open or wiping the same spot on the counter out of habit. In a world that kept asking for more from her, giving Tom a warm meal was the one thing she did without hesitation. To Sarah, kindness wasn't charity. It was humanity. And for all she knew, maybe that turkey sandwich was the only good thing he had to look forward to. That thought alone kept her going, even on days when she barely made enough to buy groceries for herself and Eli. So every day, she prepped one extra sandwich, just in case, because at 3 p.m., Tom would walk in, nod once, and remind her, in his own silent way, that even the smallest gestures can carry the greatest weight. The years slipped by like steam off a hot cup of coffee. The sandwich shop never stopped being modest. A few rickety tables, a humming old fridge, and a chalkboard menu that hadn't changed much in a decade. But it endured, and so did Sarah. Through snowstorms, heat waves, power outages, and long nights with too few sales to justify the effort, she kept showing up. So did Tom. Every day, just as the clock clicked toward 3, Sarah would glance toward the front window, half from habit, half from hope, and there he'd be, still in that same coat, now patched at the elbows, still silent, still faithful. Over time, their routine grew into something sacred. Without ever saying more than a few words, they built something unspoken between them, something built not from stories, but from consistency. By the time Eli reached his teens, he'd watched it play out hundreds of times. His mom pulling together the same sandwich. The door creaking open. Tom's quiet entrance. The nod. The thank you. The exit. One day, after the lunch rush, which was never more than 3 or 4 customers deep, Eli slid into the booth across from his mom as she wiped down a tray. "Why him?" he asked, voice soft. Sarah glanced up. "Why do you feed him?" "Every day. He never talks. He never even smiles." She looked toward the door, where the fading afternoon sun had begun to paint long shadows across the tiles. Then she turned back to her son. "Because he shows up," she said. "Because he's a person, just like us. And because if I were in his shoes, I'd hope someone would do the same." Eli thought about that for a long time. He didn't ask again. The townspeople had plenty to say. Some whispered. Some were bolder. "He's not your responsibility, you know. You're too soft. Don't you think he's taking advantage?" Sarah always responded the same way. A shrug, a quiet smile, sometimes a firm, "He's never asked for a thing." To Sarah, that mattered. Tom never begged, never demanded, never expected. He simply arrived, received what was offered with dignity, and left without leaving a trace. In some small way, it anchored her too. On days when the weight of bills and single motherhood pressed down like storm clouds, Tom's presence reminded her that kindness wasn't measured in outcomes. It was measured in willingness. Still, she sometimes wondered, who was he? Why her shop? Why 3 p.m. every day? Once, when she brought him his food, she dared to ask gently, "Is there anything you need?" He paused, mid-sip of coffee, and shook his head. That was the end of it. So she stopped asking. But she never stopped preparing his sandwich. And she never stopped setting that table. The corner booth by the window. Years passed, and the shop changed in little ways. Eli grew taller and started helping with deliveries. Sarah added a shelf of used books near the door and a "take one, leave one" sign. A few more locals began to visit regularly. But one thing never changed. The man who came at 3 p.m. Tom never aged, not in the way others did. Maybe it was the stillness in him, or the where he already carried. He was a constant in a life where most things felt temporary. Even when times were especially hard. When Sarah had to cut portions, let go of her one part-time helper, and start waking up at 5 a.m. to bake her own bread. She never skipped Tom's plate. "He's not just a customer," she said once to a supplier who scoffed at her freebie tab. "He's part of this place." Whether he heard it or not, Tom always seemed to sense her efforts. Some days, after finishing his meal, he'd leave a little something behind. A clean, folded napkin with a paperclip. A hand-picked flower. Once, a sketch of the diner done in pencil, rough but surprisingly detailed. She never saw him draw. She never saw him pick the flowers. But she kept every offering in a box behind the counter. And though he never said it in words, Tom thanked her. Every single day. With a nod. With a glance. With his quiet return. And to Sarah, that was more than enough. The rain came hard that afternoon, drumming on the diner's windows like an impatient visitor. The sky had turned the color of wet ash, and puddles had already begun to swell along the cracked sidewalk. Inside the sandwich shop, the air smelled of tomato soup and toasted rye. Sarah wiped her hands on her apron and glanced at the clock. 2:58 p.m. She moved to the counter and began assembling a turkey sandwich. Extra mustard, side of pickles, and a mug ready to be filled with black coffee. Routine. Reflex. A quiet ritual with meaning built into every slice. 3:02. No door creak. No nod from beneath the gray beanie. She watched the window, the way the water warped the world outside. Still no sign. By 3:10, she was pacing near the kitchen door, sandwich untouched on the plate. Maybe he's just late, she mumbled to herself. But Tom was never late. Eli entered from the back, wiping grease from his fingers after fixing a stubborn cooler fan. He's not here yet. Sarah forced a smile. Probably stuck under an awning somewhere. He'll be here. But he wasn't. Not that day. Not the next. For the first time in years, the corner booth sat empty, and the sandwich sat cold. By the third day, Sarah began to ask around. She visited the small shelter 2 streets over. The volunteers knew her by name. She often donated leftovers. But no one had seen Tom. Was he sick? One of them asked. He never said, she replied. She checked the downtown clinic next. Then the hospital. She called the local police station, hesitant, unsure what to even say. There's a man, she began slowly. Older, gray coat, wears a beanie. His name's Tom, I think. He's been missing from around here. Last name? The woman on the line asked. I don't know. Date of birth? I'm not sure. Is he a relative? No. There was a pause. I'm sorry, Mom. Without more, there's not much we can do. People come and go, especially during bad weather. She hung up, feeling helpless. It was the worst kind of powerlessness, loving someone in a quiet way, but not being entitled to grieve them when they vanish. By the end of the week, Sarah stopped making the sandwich at 3 p.m., but she kept the booth clean, wiped it every morning, smoothed the cushion, left a napkin folded in the center. Some part of her refused to give up. Some part of her knew that if Tom were able, he'd be sitting there. Her days returned to their old rhythm, but her heart didn't. She didn't talk about him often. But Eli noticed how she stared out the window longer now, how she paused just a beat when the clock struck 3. He noticed how her eyes flicked to the door whenever someone walked in. Maybe he found something better, Eli offered one night, trying to comfort her. Sarah nodded, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. The town moved on. Customers came and went. Bills still arrived. Sandwiches were still made. But something inside the little diner felt different. Like a light had gone out in one corner of the room. It was the kind of sadness that didn't demand tears. It just lingered, quiet, present, carved into the moments between laughter and the clink of dishes. Sarah never did clear the napkin from the booth, never filled the space with another guest, because some absences deserve to be honored, even in silence, even without answers. The seasons turned, soft and slow, like pages in a well-loved book. The quiet ache of Tom's absence remained, but Sarah found a way to carry it. It lived in the warm hush of the diner, in the empty booth she still cleaned each day, and in the small gesture she extended to every soul who walked through her door. And then, one ordinary Thursday, James walked in. He wasn't remarkable at first glance. Worn flannel shirt, a smile tucked neatly behind tired eyes, but he had a calm presence. He ordered a ham and Swiss and complimented the coffee. The next week, he came back. Then again, and again. It started small. A conversation about the weather turned into one about books. A dropped napkin turned into laughter. Then, one morning, when the coffee pot overflowed and Sarah muttered under her breath, James was suddenly behind the counter with a towel, grinning like they were partners in a sitcom. He started helping, unasked, unpaid, fixing wobbly tables, restocking the fridge, taking out the trash. Eli took to him quickly, impressed by his quiet humor and the way he could fold napkins into cranes. Over time, the rhythm of the shop subtly shifted. Where silence once hovered, there was now laughter. Sarah found herself looking forward to mornings again, not just for the warmth of fresh bread, but for James's voice greeting her with a soft, "Hey, boss," and a wink. They fell in love the way real people do, without grand declarations or music swelling in the background. Just little moments stitched into routine, sharing soup from the same bowl, dancing while sweeping the floor at closing time, brushing flour off each other's cheeks during a rush. It wasn't sudden, but it was solid. One evening, after Eli had gone home early from his shift and the shop was locked up, James asked Sarah to meet him in the back room. She expected another repair plan or an old cookbook he'd found at a garage sale. Instead, on the small prep table where she once rolled dough beside her father, sat a single paper cup. And it was a daisy, a bit droopy but bright. Next to it, a ring. Sarah blinked. James, eyes soft but steady, simply said, "You've given your heart to everyone who ever needed it. I'd be the luckiest man alive if you gave the rest to me." Tears welled in her eyes before she even answered. She nodded, then whispered, "Yes." They planned a small wedding. Nothing fancy, nothing loud. Just a garden behind the shop, where vines curled around wooden fences and the scent of herbs lingered in the air. They invited only those who mattered, a handful of close friends, neighbors, and the regulars who had watched their story unfold behind coffee cups and sandwich trays. Eli helped string lights between trees, laughing with a hammer tucked behind one ear. He was older now, taller than Sarah, and happier than she'd seen him in years. Still, as she stood near the counter each day, finalizing details between orders, Sarah's eyes drifted to the empty booth by the window. She hadn't stopped wondering. Tom had vanished like mist, and no one ever came looking for him. No one claimed to know where he went or why. But Sarah thought of him often, his quiet nod, the folded napkins, the way he always made sure to look her in the eyes when he said thank you. Sometimes, she imagined him watching from somewhere. Not close, but not too far either. As if the booth remained sacred ground, even in his absence. And maybe, just maybe, he'd know that her story had found another chapter, one filled with light, love, and the echoes of a kindness once shared between two strangers. The afternoon sun hung gently above the garden, casting golden light across rows of folding chairs and swaying blossoms. The vines along the back fence rustled in the breeze, carrying the soft scent of rosemary and lemon balm. It was the kind of day people hoped for when they planned outdoor weddings, clear, quiet, and bright with promise. Sarah stood beneath a simple wooden arch wrapped in white ribbon and wildflowers. Her dress wasn't extravagant, soft ivory, sleeves rolled just past the elbows, but it fit her perfectly. Eli stood just behind her, hands clasped, beaming with pride. James, in a clean gray suit, waited at the altar with a look in his eyes that said everything he felt but never needed to speak aloud. There were only 30 chairs, each filled with someone who'd played a small part in Sarah's journey. Longtime customers, her neighbor who always brought over tomatoes in the summer, the old postman who'd watched Eli grow up. Laughter fluttered here and there, mingled with the quiet snap of camera shutters and the rustle of dresses. Sarah's heart thumped gently beneath her ribs, a rhythmic pulse of joy, nerves, and disbelief. She had built this moment from nothing, piece by piece, over years of struggle and sacrifice. Now, surrounded by the people she loved most, she was about to begin something new. Then came the sound. Low at first, a deep hum of synchronized movement. Boots. It came from the far end of the garden path, from just beyond the shop's back gate. The music faded. Heads turned. Whispers stirred. Sarah blinked in confusion as the murmuring grew louder. Through the narrow entrance stepped 12 Marines, moving in perfect formation. Their dress blues caught the sunlight, crisp jackets, polished metals, spotless white gloves. They marched in steady silence, boots striking the stone path with soft, deliberate rhythm. Gasps rose from the crowd. A few guests stood. Eli's eyes went wide. James turned to Sarah, as surprised as anyone. But Sarah went still, her breath caught in her throat. As the Marines drew closer, forming a clean line across the back of the ceremony, her hands trembled around her bouquet. Her eyes scanned their faces, strangers, all of them. But there was something familiar in the way they held themselves, the way they walked like they carried more than just discipline. The wind in the garden seemed to still as the Marine stepped forward. His uniform was crisp, his medals catching the sunlight like small flames. But there was a weight in his eyes, not just solemnity, but something deeper. Grief, gratitude, memory. He brought his hand to his brow and offered Sarah a clean, dignified salute. "Ma'am," he began, voice calm and unwavering. "My name is Staff Sergeant Blake Harper. I served with Tom. We were stationed together overseas more than once. He was a brother to all of us standing here." A murmur of shifting cloth passed through the silent crowd behind Sarah. She felt her knees weaken and her throat tighten, but she didn't speak. She couldn't. The Marine continued, lowering his hand. "Tom's been gone a little while now. He passed peacefully, and before he did, he made us promise something." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper, slightly worn around the edges. He held it gently, reverently, like something sacred. Sarah's breath caught. "He told us," Harper said, "about a woman who fed him every day. No questions asked. No judgment. Just kindness. He told us about a little sandwich shop, a single mother, and a cup of black coffee that always came without a price tag. Harper looked directly into Sarah's eyes now. He said it saved him, that your diner, your presence was the one place in the world where he didn't feel forgotten. Tears slipped down Sarah's cheeks. Her fingers tightened around the bouquet, and she glanced briefly at Eli, who stood behind her with his mouth slightly open, eyes filled with awe. Harper unfolded the paper. Tom wrote this shortly before he died. He said if he couldn't thank you in person, we needed to come in his place. He cleared his throat, then read aloud. She never asked me why, never asked me who I used to be. She just saw a man who was hungry and gave him dignity. Every meal reminded me I was still human. If these are my last days, let someone know she mattered, that her kindness counted, that she gave more than she'll ever know. The garden was completely still. Sarah's hand went to her mouth. She tried to hold back the sob, but it came quiet, broken, raw. Harper folded the paper again and stepped closer, offering it to her. She took it with trembling hands. We didn't just come to pay our respects, he added. We came to honor you, the way he couldn't, the way he wanted us to. Another Marine stepped forward now, older, with silver at his temples. His voice was softer, but no less firm. You should know, he said, Tom was a highly decorated Marine. Purple Heart, Bronze Star, one of the best we ever served with. He just couldn't come back for what he saw out there. Not all of us do. He paused, as if searching for the right words. But what you did for him, every sandwich, every cup of coffee, wasn't just food. You reminded him he still mattered. You helped carry him farther than any of us could. Sarah wiped her face, breathing through the lump in her throat. I never knew, she whispered. He never told me. You didn't need to know, the older Marine said gently. You did what most people don't. You saw him. Behind them, the other Marines stood in solemn formation, their presence like pillars holding up the sky. Sarah looked down at the note in her hands. Tom's words, shaky but honest, full of more affection than he'd ever shown with his voice. A dozen flashbacks played her mind. Tom nodding quietly from his usual booth, the way he never asked for more, the way he always said thank you. How he once left her a folded napkin with a tiny sketch of the diner. She had kept it, tucked in a recipe book. She swallowed hard, then looked back at Harper. Thank you, she whispered, for coming, for telling me. He nodded. He was our brother. You became part of our family when you helped him. We just came to return the favor. And as the Marines stepped back into formation, Sarah stood at the altar, not just as a bride, but as someone who had unknowingly changed a life and gained a family of her own. It wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was a moment woven from threads of sacrifice, gratitude, and something deeper than anyone present could name. Sarah turned back toward James, her bouquet clutched loosely in her hands, her heart still trembling from the weight of the Marine's tribute. But behind her now stood 12 silent sentinels, shoulder to shoulder in full dress blues. They didn't speak. They didn't move. They simply stood, a living wall of respect and honor, as she prepared to say her vows. James met her eyes with a warmth that steadied her. His hands, when they took hers, were firm but gentle. She smiled, lips trembling slightly. The officiant spoke, but the words almost faded into the background. What lingered in that space was something unspoken, a collective awareness that this was more than a union between two people. It was a testament to how a single act of compassion could ripple through lives, drawing strength and community from places once forgotten. When Sarah said, I do, the wind rustled the trees softly, almost like applause. And as James repeated his vows, promising not just love, but shared burdens, shared laughter, shared peace, the Marines behind her remained still, heads bowed, as if offering silent witness on behalf of someone who couldn't be there in body, but surely was in spirit. The moment the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, there was a pause, the kind that catches breath before it's released. Then, without cue or command, every Marine stepped forward in unison, raised a hand to their brow, and saluted. The crowd of friends and neighbors rose to their feet. Not a single person remained seated. The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was profound. People clapped with tears in their eyes, with hands over hearts. A few wiped at their faces openly. Even Eli stood straighter, chin lifted, as if watching something sacred unfold. After the ceremony, the garden transformed into quiet celebration. Laughter mingled with soft music. Lemonade and sweet tea were passed in mason jars. A sheet cake, baked by Sarah's neighbor, sat proudly on a folding table, the frosting slightly smudged but full of love. The Marines formed a line, one by one approaching Sarah. The first extended his hand. "Thank you," he said simply. The next followed. "You didn't just feed him. You gave him hope." Another added, "He never stopped talking about you. You were his reminder that the world still had good in it." One Marine, older than the rest, took both her hands in his and said, "You didn't just run a sandwich shop. You changed lives." Sarah's tears came again, not from sadness this time, but from something gentler, humility. She had never imagined that handing out one sandwich a day could lead to this. By the time the last Marine reached her, her heart felt full beyond what words could hold. He smiled and handed her a small, worn patch, Tom's Marine Corps insignia, tucked into a plastic sleeve. "He said you were the best part of his last chapter," the Marine whispered. She clutched it to her chest and nodded, unable to speak. Later that evening, as the sun set behind the shop and the string lights flickered to life, people still lingered, talking about the ceremony, about the Marines, about Tom. The story spread quickly through town. By the weekend, it had made its way into local papers. Single mother honored by Marines at wedding. A life changed by one act of kindness. Customers Sarah hadn't seen in years returned just to sit at a table, ask about the booth by the window, and shake her hand. The sandwich shop, once quiet and struggling, now pulsed with something new. Not fame, but reverence. A reminder of what kindness can do, not just in theory, but in real life. And every afternoon at 3 p.m., Sarah still paused, still glanced at that booth, still wiped the table once more than needed. Because legacies aren't always written in history books. Sometimes they're carved into quiet moments. Sometimes they walk into a wedding in dress blues. And sometimes they begin with nothing more than a sandwich, a smile, and the choice to see someone the rest of the world had forgotten. If this story touched your heart, like, share, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more powerful, soul-touching stories that restore faith in humanity.